Hello students, welcome back to the lab. This is a continuation video of the functions. In previous video you have studied how we can declare a function, how we can call a function, and what are the functions. So in this video we will continue that concept and we'll go with function types, function overloading, default arguments, and variable scope. So first let's look at what are the function types. Usually in C++ we have four types of functions, that is functions with no arguments and no return value. That means in this function you cannot pass any argument, or you cannot return any value from that function. That is simply, you can say, you can use void for that. Data type of the function should be void. In void we cannot return any value, and the parameters bracket will be empty. So this is how this first type is done. The second type of functions are those functions with no arguments but they have return type or return value. And the third type of functions are those which are with arguments and but they don't have any return value. They do not return anything to us. And the last type of function are which contains both, like functions with arguments as well as with return value. So these are the four types of the functions. So let's look at these types one by one in code, and let's see how they work in code. So starting with the first type of the function, that is with no arguments and with no return value. So here we have a skeleton of the code. Like let's fill this skeleton with our own code. So we have a declaration of the function here, void add. That is, we want to we will define a add function which have a data type void. If we have a data type void, that means this will not return any value to us. So the first part of the function type is clear, that is, it will not return any value. And also we are not passing any arguments to this function. The brackets of the function is empty, so that means it will not take any argument. Whatever will be done inside this function. So let's say we want to add two numbers. So we will declare two numbers, that is num1 and num2, and a dummy variable sum to store the sum of these two numbers. We can do this without this variable, but let's do it with this variable. So we will take input two numbers. So first we will say enter first number, then we will take first number as input. After that we will take second number as an input, that is enter second number. Once we have the two numbers with us, we will add them and print their sum. So we will do what we will do, we will write sum is equal to num1 plus num2. This will add two numbers and store the sum in the variable sum. So we will print now the sum of two numbers is sum. And when we will execute this code, you will see we are just calling the function in the main. We are not passing any argument, or we are not returning any value to this function. So whatever we have done is in this function. So when we will run this code, we have an error. Let's see what's this error. Oh sorry, I have written it count. So this, let's run it. So I write 23 and 12, so it will return me 35. See, the purpose of our code was to add two numbers. We did it but using function, but we didn't pass any value, or and we didn't return any value, and we didn't pass any arguments. This is how first type is done. Now coming back to the second type of the argument, that is with no arguments but they have a return type. That means we will do the same with the definition, only the data type of the function will be changed, that is return type of the function will be changed. Now we want to return a value from the function. So instead of doing the cout in this function, that is printing the values in this function, we will do what we will do, we will return the sum value. For that matter, we have to change the return type, because from void we cannot return anything. So instead of void, if I want to return int, since my numbers are integers, so I will make the function int. If I wanted to return a float value, so I would have done float here. So now since we are returning the value from the function, so in main we need a variable that will store the return value. Let's suppose I declare it temp. So I will say temp is equal to add, and here I will print the temp variable. So and I will comment out this line because I will return the value from here. So since I've changed the data type here to int, so it will change here accordingly, and we will return the value sum. Now when we will execute this program, so we will get the same answer. Remember, I entered earlier 23 and 12, the answer was 35, and now you can see that the answer is again 35. The goal and the purpose of the program is the same, but the concept is different. So we have returned the value from the function. Alternatively, instead of storing it in any variable, you can just simply print out this function. Instead of writing temp here, you should just call the add function here, it will serve the purpose. So let's run it again. Again I am entering 23 and 12, so it should print 35, and it did. So there are multiple ways to call a function or to get the return value from the function. Now coming back to the third type of the function, which is the functions with argument but they do not return value. So remember, there is written that do not return any value. So the return type of the function would be void, and we will not need any variable or anything. We will just call. We don't even need cout. We will just simply call the function, and here we will change it to void. But what I said, the functions with the arguments, so this bracket cannot be empty. Here we should pass the arguments. Since we are adding two numbers, so we will define it that we will define it here that it will take two arguments of type int. What is the difference between this type and the previous type we have studied with no arguments? In previous types, all the work was done here in the function, not in the main function. But in this case, with arguments, all the work will be done in the main, like input, taking input and other things, but only addition will be done in this function. So what I have done is I've copied the code of the input in the main. I will take the inputs in the main, I will pass these two inputs to the function as an argument, and I will take here this function as argument and will add them. Since the type of the function is void, so I will not return any value from this function. Instead I will print the value here in the function. So when I will run this code, sorry, the sum is not declared here. Let's declare the sum here. So let's run it again. So I will again take 23 as an input and 12 as an input, and the result will be the same. So as you can see that the purpose and the values and the answers are the same, but the different ways are different. We have passed the function, we have passed the arguments to the function, and the desired result is achieved. Now coming back to the last and final type of the function, which is the, you can say that blend of type 2 and type 3. Like we will have the function with the arguments as well as with the return type. So we will have the return type, that means we cannot use void, so instead we will use integer here. then we will change it to integer here, and instead of printing out here we will call the function here in the main with cout. So that means whatever will be returned from the function will be displayed here. So I will return the value sum, and when I will run it, it will again give us the same answer. See, it's again given us the 35. So that means the purpose is achieved in different ways. So there are essentially four types of the functions as explained. Okay, so we are done with the function types. Now we will look at the default arguments, how it helps in different function types. We will come back to the function overloading later, because the default argument is very much related to function types. When we are using the functions of type which contains the arguments, there is some error related to the arguments. So we will try to address this errors using arguments. So here is a function which displays the character, the number of times we want to display it. Let's suppose we here define that count 5, that means it will display the character 5 times. So the first sometimes what we do, we just simply call the function and we don't pass any argument to that. This will give us error because here we have defined that the function is taking 2 arguments, but we are not passing it any argument. So the compiler will throw an error, that is too few argument, that means we haven't passed an argument. So what can be done in this scenario? For this scenario we have the default arguments method, that is we define some default values for each argument. Let's suppose I define the value of character variable as plus, and the integer variable value is 2. By doing this, that means even if we don't pass the argument to the function, or we forget to pass the argument to the function, it will still execute the code. So let's try it. Now what will be done, I haven't passed any argument in the function, you can see here, but still it will work and it will print the plus 2 times. Why? Because I have assigned the default value to it. So that means by assigning default value we can perform various function, or if we by mistake don't pass any argument to the function, we can still or we can say we can still execute our program. This is the one case that you don't pass any argument. But what if you pass one argument? Will that work? Let's suppose I pass only a. Now should it work? Yes, it will work, because it will take the first argument of character from here and second argument from here, which we have already defined. So what it will do now, it will print a 2 times instead of plus. Why? Because we have declared first argument as plus. So if we don't use here any default arguments, that is if I remove plus here and if I remove 2 from here, then it will again throw me an error, that is too few arguments, because I have only passed the one argument. So if I have defined the default arguments, it will not give me an error. And if like you pass both arguments, it will simply print that according to the parameters or arguments passed to the function, it will ignore the default function. This is the third case in the default argument case. So now it will print a 5 times, because we have the value of count as 5, so it have printed a 5 times. So these are the 3 cases related to the default arguments. If you don't define the default arguments, it will throw an error. So in order to avoid error, and it is a good practice in programming that you define the default arguments to avoid any crash of your code. Okay, so we are done with function types and default arguments. Now we will move to function overloading, which is also concerned with the arguments that we pass to the function. So in overloading you can perceive function overloading as normal English term that is overloading. That means you assign and the task extra task to someone. Let's suppose a person can do one job per day, but you assign it two jobs per day. That means you have overloaded him or her. So this concept is used in programming as well. That is, we assign extra functionality to the function to perform. So we perform function overloading. That is, let's suppose a function only take integer, like we want a function to sum an integer, but you are at the same time you want it to add some float values as well. So what you do, its major major work was to add integers, but you overloaded it with adding the float numbers. So this is called function overloading. Now let's move and look at it in how coding it works. So this is the code which we'll use to find the absolute of a given number. Now what is absolute? Absolute is of a number is if the value is less than 0, that is, if a value is negative, it will be turned to the positive value, and if the value is positive, simply the value will be returned. So this is the absolute value. Absolute, you can say, absolute will convert the negative values to the positive values. So let's look at it. We have a function absolute, and this is the example of a function overloading with different data types of the parameter. Like you can see that we have absolute function, both the name of the functions are the same, but their parameter type is different. One is float and other is integer. So now we have let's suppose the major or main task of this function was to find the absolute of the float variables, but we overloaded it by assigning the task to find the absolute of the integers as well. So this is called overloading with different parameter type. So let's look at it and execute the code. Now you can see that the function name is same, and I called in both cases I have called absolute irrespective of their data types. So I have called that and I got the result. What if I make it integer? Will this be executed? Now look, the function name is same, the type is also same, the parameter of the data type of the parameter is also same. Will this be executed? Let's try it. No, it cannot be, because it says ambiguous new declaration of the int. So what we have learned from this, if the function name is same and the argument type of the both function is same, then it cannot be overloaded. For a function to be overloaded, you must change the data type of its parameters. Now let's move to the other type of overloading, which includes not only the data type of the function, but also the number of parameters that is passed to it. So let's suppose we have a function that is float absolute int variable. Now this function only finds the absolute of int integer number. Now I want this same function to first find the absolute of that integer number and add a certain number to it. So I will pass it int sum, or you can say int number. So what it will do, it will find the absolute of that number, that is, if the value is less than 0, it will return it will multiply it with the negative to get the positive, otherwise it will add this number to a dummy variable int sum. I will say sum is equal to var plus num. So what it will do, it will find if the number is less than 0, it will turn it into a positive and it will add it to the num, and it will return the sum. Now what I will do, I will call the same absolute function with one parameter, and then I will pass it with two parameters, and we will see that absolute value and sum of the two numbers. So we will do, since I have changed its type to integer, so I will pass it as an integer. So now you can see that the same function is called with different number of the parameters. So the result, we have assigned the absolute two different responsibilities. First it will compute the absolute of the number, and then it will add it to the another number. This is how function overloading works. So essentially what we have learned that function overloading in C++ is of two types. One, it should have different data types of the arguments, and there should be, the number of arguments should be different. You cannot overload a function with the same data type of the arguments and same number of the arguments. So that's it for function overloading. Now we will move to the last topic of this lab, that is variable scope. What is variable scope? Scope is that the limit or the area which a variable can be accessible. By variable, I mean what the variables we declare, like int a or int b. So at which point or till which point this variable can be accessible to us on the program. So this is the called variable scope. Now let's look at it by example. You will get the better understanding of this concept. So I have chosen the simple same example that we want to add two numbers and we want to subtract two numbers. Now let's first look at the addition of the two numbers. In variable scope we have two scopes basically. Like one is an local scope of the variable, and one is the global scope of the variable. By global we means that is globally acceptable. If we declare a variable global, that will be accessible to each and every function of the program. But if we declare a function locally, that is within any function, its scope will be limited to that function. So let's look at that. Here I have declared three variables. Okay, so I will use this to add two numbers, as well as I will use it to subtract that. That is, I will find the subtraction and addition of two numbers. Now if I run this code, it will give me an error. Why? Because it says sum is declared two times, but if I remove it, it will still give me an error. Why? I haven't declared the num1 and num2 in this function, and the error says num1 was not declared in this scope. That means the num1 and num2 which we have declared here is not in the scope of this function. Its scope is only lies in this function. So we cannot access num1, num2 and sum out of this function. This is called local scope of the variable. That is, it is only accessible locally. But what if I remove it from here and I put it in the after the function declaration or function prototype, that I will declare this variable here. That means it is now globally accessible to the whole program. Now when I will run this code, it will not give us the error. So if we enter 25 and 13, it will give us the addition and subtraction of these two numbers. So now you can see that it doesn't give us any error because we have declared these two numbers as globally. but if we had declared these numbers locally in this function or either in this function, it should have given us the error. So in order to access the variable across the functions, we should declare it globally, and if the variable is required only in a certain function, then we should declare it locally. So that's it from this lab of the functions. If you have any questions, we can discuss this during the live session. Thank you.